I now give the floor to Mr. Wole Soyinka, writer and Nobel laureate.
Good morning, Mr. President, honorable members of this Assembly. Time is short, thought much longer, the walk even longer. So very quickly, I should begin by thanking my companions for showing me the monument to slavery, which indicates that we've all been preoccupied with this unpalatable, unsavory phenomenon that has engulfed the world for more than 4 centuries. I wish to begin by stating that, realizing how short the time will be, I've taken the trouble to prepare very hurriedly the full version of what I'd like to say today. In fact, there are about 4 different versions. This one, which is entitled Sand Dune and Ocean Bed, the Quest for Reparatory Justice for a Global Atrocity, which is then summed up to some extent in the long version of this speech, of which only a small portion will be read to you. I wish to stress, however, 3 points in this tract. 1, everybody, I hope, is agreed that it is not yet over, by no means over. Slave markets thrive all over the African continent. I have here with me coming the special advisor to the president of my nation on diaspora matters, and the number of trips she's made to retrieve extant slaves from the African markets. I wish she had the opportunity to communicate those statistics to you. Even more critically, however, is the fact that there is a new form, difficult to detect in many areas of the continent, but one which we feel very powerfully a sinister development, which is the involvement of you and me as collaborators in the new form of slave trade and slavery, especially on the West African sub-region and in the East. And it takes the form of even a kind of gives a spurious credibility to the forebears of slave raiders, because at least they took some risks. Today, the new slavers simply wait for you and me to send our children to school, especially boarding schools, easy prey. They descend on them and cut them away, sequester them in the fastness of forests, and then call on us to come and ransom them. This happens almost on a daily basis. The name Chibok is familiar to all of you, but you have no idea how many Chiboks there are, especially in the West African sub-region. Second point is the rather convenient classification of slavery. Some forms of slavery are more benign, more humane than others, and therefore must not be talked about. Until we adopt a holistic, comprehensive, and egalitarian attitude to the phenomenon of slavery, I'm afraid it's going to be with us for a very long time. You know, the house slave versus the field slave, Indian Ocean slave, more benign than the Saharan, more sinister than the transatlantic. No, let us all agree that the phenomenon of slavery is contrary to humanity, and it has an egalitarian base, for the simple reason that the core of slavery is the robbery of human beings, races, communities, nations, of their right of volition. when they're owned by someone else, then there's a condition of slavery. Any human being owned by another is a slave, is enslaved. Very quickly, let me refer to a film, a recent, well, not so recent film, Django Unchained. I think that definition of slavery is captured by that moment when the actor, DiCaprio, takes one of his property by chain, squeezes her really cruelly and says, "This is my property. I can do with her what I like." Another episode was when this same character is prepared to forego, to lose some of his capital in the form of a fugitive slave by setting his bloodhounds to tear that slave to pieces, to indicate that, dead or alive, this thing, this object, even though it's walking on two legs, belongs to me. I can do what I like. And those forms of slavery still exist in many forms. We can only imagine what kind of existence the enslaved of Chibok, of Dapchi, have been undergoing since 300 pupils were removed from their school in Nigeria. This is a blot on universal conscience, and events like that demand a constant alertness, an acceptance of a phenomenon for which the entire globe should be ashamed, since it's gone on for over half a millennium, especially in a quantitative, commercial manner. And so we come to the point of what can we demand of this assembly to tackle these varieties of these variations on the theme of slavery, which I keep insisting is unified. Well, earlier I admitted my seeing the phenomenon, the monument created outside these premises to the memory of slavery as a reminder of the responsibilities of the global community. And so I'll just take it from there and say we need a monument or two like that, accessible virtually to the rest of the world. Hardly any part has not indulged in the slavery business. We need a different kind, not so static, dynamic culminating, however, in the symbolic form. Oh yes, there's a point which I forgot. I should mention that. It is impossible to quantify the appropriate reparation for such a global atrocity. We can only tackle it symbolically, gesturally, but propulsively also, so that it gives further meaning to the ambition of humanity to recover itself. So let's give up any idea of material reparations. Let's deal with it symbolically. And one of these ways, one of these symbolic activities we can engage in is to dynamize what already exists as static monuments to this global embarrassment. We call it the Heritage Voyage of Return. In visual terms, the concept is not too distant in orientation from those 19th and 20th century expositions, Berlin, London, Manchester, etc., in West and other parts of the world. Expositions crammed full with the spoils of rape and pillage of others. This time, however, what is being proposed is a lived-in exposition as a moving remembrance monument, a transitional warehouse of a continent's past, present, and future, a vibrant statement on a continent's interrupted history. That's Africa, for the avoidance of doubt. Within this monument, a special honor gallery will house artifacts looted from African continent, but since returned under the spirit and ethos of restitution. Seminars, readings, Africa-themed films, documentaries, installations, clinics, and lifestyle parades, music from the African continent and diaspora, a unique library and manuscript collection, archaeological retrievals, an exhumed slave vessel. Pictures are there on the monument, for instance. The boat will take off when the diaspora make a call at representative ports of slavery connection, positive or negative, on its way to the West African coast and beyond, maybe around the Cape of Good Hope to the east and so on. Primarily for descendants of the enslaved, it is also open to others, that is, others who are equally embroiled in the quest for a new humanity that embraces, not excludes, that is curious, not foreclosed, that still lays claim to conscience as a touchstone of the rational species. The nature of reparatory justice that befits the magnitude of slavery wrongs can only be symbolic, as I said earlier, gestural. Yes, but also morally and therapeutically propulsive, one that goes to the core of a continent's humanity, vividly expressed in its arts and spirituality. It is a symbolic voyage of return, one that stands to become an annual fixture. Effectively, it offers no more than a continuation of UNESCO's work on the roots of enslaved peoples, beamed deservedly at the African continent. The heritage voyage of return is a voyage of learning, leisure, and linkage. We call it the 3 L's. It is not only feasible, it is propulsive, it's imperative. Yes, we know such a voyage presumes to teach the world, to bring the world into confrontation with centuries of wrong and possibly a recovery of its own lost humanity. It, however, it is not designed, it's important, it's not designed to be a vessel of recriminations, but a floating vessel of peaceful options and neglected knowledge. Glorified tourism, perhaps, why not? But it is tourism with an attitude, as they say in this part of the world. This is a return, not just to a wrong continent, but a return of the world to its holistic potential, to what it can be, short of fixations, irrational concepts, embedded prejudice, lust for power and domination. It shall be manifested as a first furlong in a voyage towards, put simply, a reinsertion of human in that grossly depleted word, humanity. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Soyinka.
I think we'd all like to think and believe that slavery doesn't exist anymore. But according to the official statistics, in 2016, there were about 46 million slaves on the planet. 70% of whom are women. And the remaining 30 were men. So which states still have slavery? Hey guys, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to be talking about a country that is probably the last one in the world where slavery is still considered the norm. If you were to try and characterize this country in a few words, they'd be filth, poverty, crime, unemployment, illiteracy, and slavery. So, Mauritania. The Islamic Republic of Mauritania is a state in West Africa, which has access to the Atlantic Ocean. The Sahara Desert leaves its traces everywhere in this country, covering everything with sand, even the city streets. It is responsible for many of the country's hardships, such as the lack of water and vegetation, poverty, heat, and dust storms. Mauritania has neither rich resources, nor developed industry, nor tourism. The country's deposits of iron and copper ores are mined by foreign companies and don't actually belong to the local authorities. The country's manufacturing base is the most underdeveloped in Africa. Mauritania is one of the most economically underdeveloped countries in the world. The country is in 131st place in terms of GDP per capita. 40% of the population lives below the poverty line. The unemployment rate in the country is 30%. The average life expectancy is 60 years. 40% of men and 60% of women are illiterate. This country is one of the 10 least visited countries in the world. The population of this country is 3.3 million people. 100% of the population are Muslims. 50% of the working population is employed in agriculture, 10% in industry, and 40% in the service sector. Mauritania is the last state in the world where slave owners don't get persecuted. Despite the official abolition of slavery, first in 1980, Mauritania was the last country in the world where it was still allowed. And then in 2007, de facto, about 20% of the population of Mauritania are slaves. There are no reliable statistics on how many slaves there are in Mauritania, because the country's government doesn't take them into account during the census, and denies the very fact of their existence. However, according to human rights activists, up to 740,000 of the country's residents actually remain in slavery to this day. Thus, Mauritania is the largest stronghold of traditional slavery on the planet. Most of the slaves are black people owned by the ruling class of Berbers. Slaves don't have any personal, economic, or political rights. Both men and women are enslaved, and the children born into slavery become the property of the slave owners. The Mauritanian government denies the existence of slaves, and although it is illegal to own slaves, forced labor isn't prohibited in the country. Slaves do all the dirtiest and hardest work. Typical tasks the slaves get are working in the fields, caring for livestock, and serving in the house. Slavery in Mauritania arose as a result of some historical events. Arabic-speaking Moors raided African villages for centuries, which resulted in a rigid caste system that still exists today. The dark-skinned slaves still serve their fair-skinned masters, Arabs. The descendants of the black population enslaved many generations ago make up the Heriton caste. Slavery is hereditary, which means that the children of slaves belong to the masters of their parents, and even de jure freed slaves virtually continue to live as slaves, unable to manage the money they earn. The owners of the enslaved Mauritanians treat them like property. They don't pay them for their labor, they often beat them, and they can give them or rent them out. In Mauritania, a slave can be sold. Slaves are sold only on the domestic market. The cost per person is about $100. Given that most of the population lives on less than $2 a day, that's a lot of money. Slaves don't live long, but work for wear and tear throughout their short lives. Those who do not submit or try to escape are beaten to death. Slave owners claim that punishment enhances discipline and prevents attempts at disobedience. The reports of human rights activists describe the terrible and sophisticated tortures to which slaves are subjected. For example, filling the insides of a person with insects, inserting a red-hot stake into their anus, breaking their joints, etc. Heritons are brought up in such a way that they perceive working for their masters as their religious duty. Slave owners teach them from early childhood that it is only through obedience and devoted service that they would get to go to heaven after death. The dark skin of the Heritons is considered unclean, therefore they are forbidden to touch the Quran and visit mosques. In Mauritania, the saying, "Paradise is at the feet of your master," is very common. Its meaning is that the path to salvation lies in unquestioning obedience. To this day, the descendants of slaves often don't get a passport at birth. They don't go to school and don't have access to health care. The exception is the residents of the capital and its environs. Many of them do get documents and primary education. However, the wind of change hasn't reached the inhabitants of remote provinces, that is, half the population of the country. Slavery is fought by several organizations and a small political party. The government of Mauritania established the Commission for Human Rights in 1999, but it isn't known to have taken any action. There are reports of police complicity in slavery, as well as the imprisonment of activists of non-governmental organizations dealing with forced labor and slavery. The government banned the use of the word slave in the media. The liberation and rehabilitation of slaves in Mauritania is only done by local and international non-governmental organizations. Although some observers note the gradual decrease in the number of enslaved Mauritanians, the situation is exacerbated by the influx of thousands of refugees from neighboring Mali, where military conflict has been ongoing since 2012. There are several factors that get in the way of the implementation of significant changes in this matter. They are the lack of alternative options to earn a living and lack of protection, high levels of illiteracy, limited access to information, as well as separation of family members and the use of methods of control by the slave owners, including influence through religion. It has all led to a deep-rooted acceptance of the victim's inherited status as slaves. In 2007, slavery in Mauritania was criminalized, and in 2015, the authorities toughened the punishment for it from 10 to 20 years in prison. Moreover, special courts were created to try the cases of slave owners, while the victims were offered free legal assistance. However, according to media reports, the perpetrators have been punished only 3 times in recent years. In 2011, the slave owner was sentenced to 6 months in prison, and 2 more were sentenced to 5 years in 2016, but 4 of those years were suspended. The Mauritanian authorities took the first steps towards the comprehensive fight against slavery in 2003, when the government turned to the World Bank and independent experts to create an action plan after the presidential elections. Although the military coup in 2005 slowed down the plan's implementation, some parts were still successfully carried out. For example, a campaign to inform Mauritanians about the abolition of slavery. The country is also fighting corruption at the same time, as well as trying to stimulate economic development. Improving the economy would help free many citizens from slavery. De facto slavery in Mauritania is still a slow and invisible process that leads to the social death of many thousands of men, women, and children. Well, that's all for today. Like the video if you find it interesting. And I feel like this is one that it would be great to share with a friend too, and let them know about what's happening in this country. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you again next time.